Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support in our recent content. We have been doing live streams recapping the Olympic Games, minutes after they end. So, in this episode, we will continue, our off-season breakdowns, in the Eastern Conference. But those live streams will be, up and ready to, for you guys' viewing. So before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah. So, Team USA rides again. Victory once again.
Mm-hmm.
They played Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rican national team, right? We talked about this, where we kind of expected more of the same, right? It was competitive in the first quarter, right? Actually, Puerto Rico had a lead for most of the first quarter. They ended the lead, I think, up 30-25. A lot of hot shooting, a lot of up and down play. And they scored, they dropped 30 on Team USA in the first quarter, right? Bad defense, bad offense, bad everything. And then from the second quarter onwards, huge run to turn, basically what was an 8-point deficit to a 19-point lead at halftime, right? Anthony Edwards led the way with 26 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds, right? Plus 12 on the evening, right? Kevin Durant with 11, Joel Embiid with 15, also with several boos at different points in the game, right? And he also, in his return to the lineup, right? He did not play in the previous game against South Sudan. This time around, he started against the Puerto Rican team. Jason Tatum also started as well. He stayed in the starting 5 because Jrue Holiday didn't play due to an ankle injury. But it was still more of the same, right? Again, really good play on both ends of the floor. We talked about it in the live stream. There was this one lineup where they had Bam, Bam, Ant-Man, KD, and then I think also Derek White and Edwards were in there as well. And those were some, those were some nightmarish lineups for the Puerto Rican national team to go against, just because of the fact that we talked about it, where there's length, there's athleticism, there's versatility, there's switchability, and offense, like basically everywhere. And there's not a whole lot you can really do about it, right? I feel like that's a lineup that they're, that would be a really good lineup to go to. I don't know if it'll be a closing lineup, because I feel like they're going to try to close with the vets, but it's a lineup that I think you can put out there for a change of pace, option, just to kind of shake things up and, add some really, some chaos, right? But it's controlled chaos, because all those guys are very skilled on both ends of the floor, and I'm not really sure, how many teams can really match that, because again, we've talked about it, where you have guys that DNP that are still top 20 guys in the NBA, right? Again, like we had Joel Embiid, right, who won MVP a year ago, right? And he DNP'd. You had Jason Tatum, best player on a championship team, DNP, right? Halliburton, best player on an Eastern Conference Finals team, DNP. So, and also with Steve Kerr, right? He gets a lot of credit here, because, it's not really easy to kind of do, some of this politicking stuff where, certain guys, that I'm sure want to play just aren't going to play from game to game. Starting 5 changes every game, kind of to fit whatever they have to do against some of these teams, and the lineups in between also as well. I understand at times, I know some of his stuff can be kind of frustrating, because sometimes it feels like, some of his, I guess, principles he's trying to incorporate with the team that where that doesn't really work, just because of some of the personnel. So I understand that. But he also gets credit, when he gets some of this done. But it's also kind of a, darned if you do, darned if you don't situation anyways, because we've talked about it with Team USA. When they win, it's like, well, you should win because you're better than everybody, right? But even if it's a win where it's a 20-point victory, but, it was close in the first quarter, but you never felt like they were going to lose, other than maybe if you looked at the first quarter, I don't know. But regardless, besides that, it's like, yeah, if you win, you're supposed to. And then if you lose, well, it's like you suck. But they haven't lost yet, right? They're undefeated, including exhibition, as they wait for the winner of Serbia and South Sudan, right? Who, by the time we live stream, that will have already happened, and we'll react to that as well. So come join that and check us out if you can. But, what are your thoughts kind of on this? Because, again, like, there's not like a lot of big picture takeaways. I feel like, other than that lineup, of course. But I think maybe if you want to have one, it's it's just very clear the versatility of this roster. Just the fact that regardless of what situation you have, there's a lineup for that.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of repeating ourselves at this point. We expected that, Team USA would come out and pretty much stomp Puerto Rico like they did. But, I think you look at the minutes discrepancy, and it's not that bad. Like you said,
Right.
Steve Kerr has been doing a very good job making sure everybody plays. There's some starters that, got less minutes than some guys on the bench. And that's because, once these guys get the hot hand, you kind of have to roll with it. Like you look at Anthony Edwards and what he was able to do in 17 minutes of play, 11 for 15, 26 points. Like that's pretty special. But this is a guy who only played 17 minutes compared to, a Jason Tatum and Joel Embiid who played 23 apiece. But, they did their fair share of things too. Like, it's not all about points. And the problem is, you kind of have to throw the NBA stuff out of the window. Like I said in the last, episode that we had, it's more so, you have to look at this team as a collective, and not so much, individually what they do, in the league, because it is a different game. Like, guys are filling into roles. Once again, Jason Tatum being, the leading rebounder. Shout out to Kevin Durant, like I said in the live stream, for becoming, the all-time, rebounder, Olympic leader. So that's pretty cool. And then LeBron James being a facilitator, Embiid also being a post scorer, Booker and Curry both being spot up guys. I mean, it's really cool to see what, you can really, I guess, create with all these guys on one roster and one team. Kevin Durant being a spark plug off the bench is also pretty dang cool, if you ask me. So, they're kind of just picking apart each team. And I think each time they play a team, it's going to be different because each team is different. Each team that they've played has been different thus far, whether it be through exhibition or, through the actual Olympic Games. Every team has been different. So it seems like they get a feel for them in the first quarter. They adapt in the second. And then they, the floodgates pretty much open in the third and fourth. And then maybe, there's a fake comeback, from the other team in like the fourth or something like that. But, you never feel
one of my favorite terms.
Exactly. So you never really feel like, the game will ever become out of reach or anything like that for this team, just because they always have that safety net of, the extreme talent and depth to fall back on. So, overall, hats off to Puerto Rico for, coming out here and showing us what they got. I think D Wade said it the best, they don't have a lot to lose. So, they came out there, were firing, and, great statement in the first quarter, but that's where that talent and depth really comes into play with the U.S. And shout out to the U.S. for pulling off another dominant win, as they should.
Yeah. Shout out Jose Alvarado, right, who was the leading scorer for Puerto Rico, right? Again, he'll have a big role on that New Orleans team, next season, right? Because they're gonna have to figure out, some things with that roster. Even though they'll still be, probably good, but yeah, with Team USA, yeah, that's just kind of cool how there's just a lot of different guys and can kind of, allow you to play different styles in different ways, right? Like you got, like you mentioned, Embiid as a post-up scorer. You got guys like Steph and Booker who can attract a lot of attention off the ball, right? Off of screens, off of curls. As you mentioned, guys like LeBron who can pass, guys like Derek White who can just, come in there and cause chaos on both ends of the floor. Just a lot to really like about this team. Again, is it perfect? Maybe not necessarily, but it's still, as we mentioned, right, clearly good enough, to win, right? Because again, like this team should have really no real issues, winning the gold because, I mean, again, like just the level of talent, combined with the fact that now you can kind of see the chemistry, right, kind of evolving and getting better, each and every game. And like you said, I think it's kind of cool how, everybody's been able to play because in this game, like you said, the minute spread was pretty spread out. Now, to be fair, I mean, a good chunk of the game was kind of decided, but either way, like, we saw in a couple of the other games where some guys just, like in the first game, we had multiple guys that literally just didn't play at all, right? Like, I mean, they blew out Serbia and Tatum played 0 minutes, right? Halliburton played 0 minutes. They could have gotten in into the fourth quarter at any point, but that's kind of the cool thing, and that's something that I wouldn't have necessarily expected because I would have just assumed that, like, yeah, there's probably going to be X amount of guys that play and get minutes, and then some guys just won't play. Now, maybe there will be a close game, which is what we've talked about, where there is going to probably be a time where there's a game where some guys just not, where it's a big game, right, a big stretch, and a guy that was playing but not playing well doesn't play anymore. Or a guy that they don't trust in a game like this gets a DNP. Like, it's probably going to happen at some point. Even if it's a game where they end up winning by double digits at the end, there's going to be a moment where something like that is going to happen. And maybe you could say that happened in the first game. for sure, right? Because we mentioned the DNPs and things like that, but just the growth overall of the team, like even in this game, right? Only 11 turnovers, right? Because that's been a huge problem for Team USA, over the course of, all these games, including going back to exhibition, where it feels like you look up and they have close to 20 turnovers every game, right? So that if that can get cleaned up as well, I think that would be really helpful just because of the fact that, turnovers are always harmful to your team because they're wasted possessions, right? Obviously, the worst ones are the live ball turnovers where, it results in a steal and a fast break for the other team. But, it's still not good to have, the dead ball turnovers either because it's a possession that you could have had, but now you don't. But, but like, keeping them around, below, I don't know, 15, if you can do that, if you can have like not much more than like maybe 12 or so, like that's pretty good because then that means you're going to have a decent amount of possessions where yeah, you just missed, right? Or something like that, which is, not quite as bad as just throwing the ball away to the other team.
Yeah.
So, and I think that comes with, again, guys getting more comfortable playing alongside one another as well. Because we know these guys are all smart basketball players, right? So, um, like, yeah, you're going to have weird, goofy mistakes over the course of a game. Like, that always happens. But, if you can minimize them in a way where there's not as many, like, just what are you doing type of plays, then I think that's good.
Yeah, and like, going back to the minutes thing, a lot of these guys are used to playing, 30 plus minutes in the regular season and then, 40 come playoff time, but a lot of them aren't even scratching 20. So, that's kind of the thing where it's like, yeah, maybe through like 18 minutes or 17 minutes in Devin Booker's case, like 3 for 9 isn't bad because he might, be privy to heat up later on, in, another 13 minutes, but he doesn't have that luxury. So that's where I really, applaud Steve Kerr in being able to plug and play all these guys and figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like even like with the turnover point, like you just said, like LeBron toned the turnovers down tremendously from last game.
Yeah.
I think in last game he had like almost 6 or 7,
6.
but in this one he had 1. So, taking care of the ball is going to be the key. Obviously, shot making is going to be a factor, but for me, I think, it's defense that really sets this team apart.
Right. Yeah, because that's really kind of the, if you want to have like some type of nitpick or whatever or knock on the team, it is the turnovers, right?
Yep, and we said that early on. We said that from day one.
Yeah,
From the moment the team was put
exactly.
together and they stepped on the court together, we were like, the glaring issue is the turnovers.
Yeah,
and the positive part is the defense. It's awesome.
Exactly, and the defense has gotten better now. Where again, like in the exhibition, you had a couple of those games where those other teams that they're playing against are getting around or more than 100 points. But now it's like, it's nope. Puerto Rico, I think this was the highest scoring. How many points did South Sudan have when they played them? I think it was 86.
Yeah.
So that's the highest total, right? Because Serbia had 84, South Sudan had 86, and Puerto Rico had 83. So nobody scored more than 86 against this team in the actual games that count, right? Whereas if you look at the exhibition games, Germany had 88, South Sudan had 100, Serbia had 79, so not a big deal there. Then Australia had 92, right?
Yeah.
And then Canada had 72. So you had a couple of good performances in there, but also like, you can see the difference. And that's also a part of what we talked about where like the team is now locked in because these games matter. Because you could clearly see in the exhibition games, I'm not going to sit here and say it was all clowning around, right? But you could tell the level of energy and effort wasn't the same because you're just not going to do that for an exhibition game that doesn't really matter. Like, when it was close, you saw them, you saw them get, locked down and everything else. But, just this is just kind of human nature, right? It's just kind of like in a scenario, even like in a regular season game, if you're up, 25 in the fourth quarter, like you're going to see the teams usually relax. It's just, again, what you don't want is you don't want to completely take your foot off the gas pedal for the entire way because then you could find yourself in a bad spot where you end up blowing a big lead in the fourth as we've seen, right?
Yeah.
But in the case of Team USA, right, the mindset's been really good in all these games. Again, it's usually like slow start to the game, but then after the first quarter, everything's pretty much fine and dandy.
Yep.
Yeah, so now more offseason. So now we're going into the New York Knicks. This is the last team we're talking about in the Atlantic Division, right? So, again, the New York Knicks, right? We go over what they did last season. And, again, they went to the second round again, right? But it felt like this team was better than the one the year before, right? They went 50-32 for a good chunk of the season, right? They were a top 10 team on offense and defense. I believe they finished seventh offensively, defensive rating, 10th in defensive rating overall, right? So that's really good, right? So net rating wise, they were a top 5 team. And it's kind of funny, right? Because, at the beginning of last season, right, they had a different roster, right? Because you did have Brunson, you did have Randall, and you did have Robinson and Hartenstein, but next to them, you had RJ Barrett, and you also had, guys like Emmanuel Quickley and guys like Quentin Grimes. But then they made the big trades, right, where all of a sudden, right, RJ Barrett and Quickley are gone, and in comes OG Anunoby, right? Obviously they also had signed DiVincenzo in the offseason, right? And then the shape of the roster changes. Then they make the deadline moves, right, where they got Bogdanovich and Alec Burks. Those didn't really necessarily pan out too much because of injuries, right? Bogdanovich in the playoffs got hurt and didn't really play. And then Burks, he had to be kind of unearthed from the rotation and help them out in some of those games. But unfortunately, injuries did him in, right? By the time they got to that second round, they were pretty much done. Bunch of guys were out. Bunch of guys that were in there had no legs left, and it was over. They had a great first round victory against the Sixers. We picked them to win that series, even though there were a lot of people that were kind of 50-50 on that one, which is understandable because of the Embiid factor. We thought they were going to beat the Pacers, went to 7 games, looked like they had a chance. Then, like I said, the injuries happened. And also, Julius Randle missed the latter part of the season, too. But I think the interesting part was when OG, and those guys played, their record was ridiculous. I mean, they were like basically winning like 80% of their games with those guys. And then of course, OG was also hurt too, right? Barely played for them, for the most part. But they made a big splash this offseason, right? They ended up sending out not big names, but the name they brought in, right, was more significant, right? They sent out Bogdanovich and others, right? Kind of salary filler guys. And they brought in not Miles, my bad, Mikal Bridges.
Yeah.
Exactly, from Villanova, right? Which is something that we kind of in jest sort of talked about last season for the Knicks at one point, where we were saying something like, what if they kind of just go all in and they try to get like a Mikal Bridges and have him join, that Villanova trio to have them have 4 guys, but it actually happened.
Yeah.
Right. It was kind of the first big trade of this offseason, right? Because that was, right before the draft. It was like the day before, because it was late. And, when you look at the trade, it's kind of wild in terms of like, it was very much a picks trade. And we don't need to really talk about it from the Nets perspective because this is about the Knicks offseason. But, what a great acquisition, right, for the Knicks, because you're talking about a guy that does a lot of the things that you would want, right, from that position, right? He's a guy that can defend. He's a guy that can shoot. He's a guy that can kind of score in bunches, right? We saw after that Durant-Kyrie trade, he averaged over 20 a game. Had a bit of a down year last season, but again, he was playing in an outsized role. Whereas now he goes to this Knicks team, and now he's not the number 1 option, right? Now, he might be third, right? Behind Brunson and I guess Julius Randle, assuming, he still, stays, which I think he will at this point. And in terms of what the Knicks got, right? They got Bridges and Keita Bates-Diop. Don't know what he'll do. I think he's hurt right now. Also a 2026 second round pick. And they didn't send out too many players that mattered. Bogdanovich, Diakite, and Shake Milton, but it was the picks. 4 unprotected first round picks, an unprotected pick swap, top 4 protected first round pick, and a second. So you're talking about 5 firsts, 1 pick swap, and a second, right? We talked about it. It's a lot of picks. 25, 27, 29, 20, 31, as well as a pick swap in 28, and a top 4 protected 25 first round pick from the Bucks. But the thing about these picks is the Knicks are at a point where they don't really need to draft a ton of more players. They need, kind of more win now talent right now, right? You can kind of fill out the rest of the roster with, whatever's in free agency. But their core of guys, right? You're talking about Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Randall, that's a really good group of 4 guys. Then you have guys like Josh Hart, and DiVincenzo, who were starting last year, but now they're probably going to come off the bench. Robinson is probably going to have to slide back into the starting five because of the fact that Hartenstein's gone, which is unfortunate, but it felt like it was going to happen. Miles McBride stepped up in his increased role right after they made the trade of Quickly, right? And he fit in really well, as like an athletic, point of attack defensive guy who can also, knock down some shots. They brought in Cameron Payne. They brought in Chuma Okeke, over the last couple of days. I'm not sure if he'll play. That's probably just kind of one of those, fill the end of the bench type guys. Brought back Precious Achiuwa. So they did a lot. And they gave Jalen Brunson that big extension. Obviously, he took a significant discount. So after next season, he'll be making 35, 38, 40 with a player option for 43 when he could have been making like 60 million. But supposedly, once he opts out of that next player option in 2028, then in 2029, then he'll sign for a huge, max extension after that, right? So it's kind of like taking less money now, to kind of help the team out now, and then you get rewarded for it later. We'll see if that works out. But yeah, their roster's awesome. They gave Tom Thibodeau, right, another extension, right, for a few years, right? He's done a good job here. I know people have qualms about his, minutes distribution, which can be very frustrating. But again, I think as we've mentioned multiple times, right, guys like him, guys like Brunson and others, they've helped kind of change the culture for the Knicks, where this is, a significantly more serious basketball team, which I know, the term unserious feels kind of overused at this point, but, this is a very mature basketball team, which I think, bodes well for, their ability to really go far. Obviously, they have to stay healthy, right, which is, a significant thing that they're going to have to overcome. The Randall injury felt like a freak injury. He's generally been pretty durable, right, over the course of his career, right, so you don't normally have a lot of concerns about him. Hopefully he's, going to be healthy enough to play at the beginning of the season. But you look at his last few seasons before this, where he played 46 games. It was 77, 72 in a 72-game season, 71 in a 72-game season. Also, 73, 82. So he's been very durable, right? Other than last year and his rookie year where he had the broken leg in game one as a Laker, right? So you like that. And with Bridges, we've already talked about. It's a reduced role, or, a role where you're not relying on him for certain things. So that allows him to maximize what he does best, right? He can switch, he can defend, he can score, he can do all of that, which is awesome, right? So now they have, a really good mix of putting a bunch of guys that can really defend around Brunson, as well as guys that aren't afraid to mix it up, aren't afraid to show up in big games, aren't afraid to hustle. So, this roster, I think, I don't want to say underrated, because I feel like everybody feels like that they're going to be really good. But, if they can stay healthy, they might have a shot, right? I don't think people are going to pick them to come out of the East, necessarily, because you still have Boston and other teams, hanging around as well. But, to me, off-season grade-wise, it's rough, to kind of choose between like a minus, or a B plus, because of the thing is that the Bridges trade is awesome, but it does suck to lose Hartenstein. If you feel like the Hartenstein thing is a huge loss, which it is a loss, then you could bump it down to a B plus, but I'm gonna leave it at an A minus, or even A, honestly, because I really like pretty much everything that they did this offseason. I guess I'll do A. If they had kept Hartenstein, it would have been an A plus, but I'll leave it at A.
Okay, that's fair. I'm going in a little bit of a different direction.
Okay.
I'm giving them a B, and it's pretty much for what
Okay.
you kind of hinted at towards the end. The Bridges trade is amazing. I think everybody's in love with that. Like, there's no issues about it. Like, in some terms, yeah, you could call it an overpay, but I feel like it's a justified overpay. It's really is justified. Like,
Yes, with what I talked about.
yeah, you already talked about it with the picks and stuff like that. Like, the Knicks don't really need that. You need win now guys. They also drafted Dadier, Tyler Kolek as well, who could potentially be a roster guy as well. And they normally, the Knicks, they're a sleeper team in terms of what they're able to do in the draft. I feel like they normally hit on like sleeper guys, like like Miles McBride. So I think they're right up there in terms of Miami Heat with kind of cultivating those second round guys. So that should be interesting. But after missing out on Donovan Mitchell 2 seasons ago, I think bringing in a guy like McCall Bridges fits even more, and you're kind of remedying that error where it's like, all right, yeah, maybe there was a little. Exactly. Double down on Brunson because he's the guy. They proved that. you got tons of other players as well. And OG Anunoby has just been amazing for them. And I think, he's a star. Josh Hart, I would even call him a star. DiVincenzo, like they're balling out. It's just, that void at the center position is just too heavy, I think, for me to kind of give them an A overall for the offseason. I would say the Bridges trade is like an A plus by itself, but the overall offseason, you're losing out on Isaiah Hartenstein, and then you have Mitchell Robinson, Jericho Sims, and Precious Achua. Like that center room does not give me a whole lot of confidence. So that's kind of the part where it bogs down the grade a little bit for me, but it doesn't impact how high I am on the Knicks at all, because I'm super high. I think they're the runner up in terms of who I would have coming out of the East. Like I have Boston and New York. Those are the two teams that I have in mind for coming out of the East. So, you mortgage your future to a team that didn't have a future, and it's a fair trade. It's equivalent exchange. You get a star that's going to help you win right now, and you gave away a little bit of your future because you need to win right now. And I think they're going to be good throughout all those years, so it didn't matter anyway.
Yeah. Exactly.
So overall, I think the Knicks with this offseason, they lost out on Hartenstein, but they doubled down on Brunson, and they legitimized their roster, because everybody forgets they were one win away from the Eastern Conference Finals, and they just upgraded. Yeah. So I think they're legit.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's kind of tough because given the fact that they had no control over keeping Hartenstein because of the money he got,
right?
That's also where the Bridges trade helps soften the blow. Because imagine if you didn't get Bridges,
oh my god,
and you lost Hartenstein, that'd be rough, right?
That'd be a step back.
Like, okay, now you gotta get ready to kind of bump the grade down.
I'd be higher on an Indy at that point.
Yeah, exactly. But and that's the tough part. It's like, because it's like ideally you want to have both, but I guess for you, like, if you had to choose, which one would you rather have?
Between Hartenstein or Bridges?
Yeah. And
Bridges,
that's
no
not
question.
Really normally right. And like that's not normally like what the question should be, because normally like the answer is obvious. You want both if you can have both. It's just tough from the Knicks' perspective because of the fact that he had a 2-year deal with them. You don't get the bird right, so you can't just pay whatever you want to keep him. So then a team like OKC can outbid and be like, yeah, we'll give you a deal, a big deal where you get $30 million in year one, right? And it goes down each year, and that's tough.
But Bridges is underrated because in the system he's gonna fit perfectly, like
right? And
his numbers are awesome. So,
and we've already talked about the fact that these guys played together in college, so there's not going to be any, there's not really going to be too many issues of figuring out how to play together because they did that already. And they won a national championship together. So that's where you'll have a lot of, you won't need to worry about spending a ton of time trying to figure out how it works, because, you already have a proof of concept of it. Obviously, there's some other personnel mixed in there that wasn't there at Villanova, right? Like Randall and OG and Mitchell Robinson. But, those are upgrades anyway, because those are very good NBA players. Like you said, the main question is the center spot. You need more than Mitchell Robinson, right? Because, Hartenstein took the starting spot from him because Robinson was hurt, and he played so well that you couldn't take him out of the starting five. Because Robinson initially was kind of like the starting center for the Knicks, and he's paid like a starting center, right? The contract isn't big by any means, right? $14 million this year, then $13 million next year. It's just the issue for him is just the fact that this guy just misses so much time due to injury, right? And there's not really any real indication that he's going to improve in regards to that, right? Because you look at his rookie year, right? He played 66 games, right? 2019, so he only missed 16 games that season. Then in 2020, he played 61 games. The Knicks, I believe, played, if we check what the Knicks did that year, right? They went 21-45. So they played, 66 games.
Mm-hmm.
So his first two seasons, he was actually pretty durable. Then in 2021, only played in 31 games out of a possible 72. Then the following season after that, 72 games, which is good. And then 59 games the year before last year, and then this year 31. And then also got hurt in the playoffs. So it feels like the injury concerns might actually be more severe now than it was before. And that's the problem where, if he's out and he's out for long stretches, that's brutal. Because like you said, then you don't really have anybody that you really feel super comfortable comfortable about starting at the 5. And that's where maybe the hope is that maybe you could combine some of these contracts and find a way at the deadline to acquire some random center, right? I don't know who that would be, but that might be the hope, because that's really the main thing that you really need, because you have everything else, because you have Brunson as the guy, as you already mentioned. He was second team All NBA last year, so basically a top 10 player, right? Probably going to be as good as he was last year,
Mm-hmm.
maybe better. Then after that, you're getting Randall back, who, when he's at his best, he's an all-star level guy, even though he has the postseason dips. You have OG, you got Bridges, right? And then you have everyone else, right? So that's a really good roster. It's just, like you said, it feels like the hole is the center spot. So if they could get that, then they'd pretty much be set. Like I said, I just don't necessarily know what the pathway to that would be, because it's, like I said, it's probably trying to put together a couple of these lower contract guys and getting a trade done. But but which centers are out there that we know are going to be moved at the deadline, right? You can probably look at, and we've talked about it, right, where you can probably look at some of those bad teams, right, that have some guys that could be traded at the deadline. Maybe like a Valanciunas, right? That could, and I'm not saying he's going to the Knicks, but like, just guys like that don't make a ton of money, that are on teams where those guys could easily be gone at the deadline, right? You look over at, like I said, the Wizards, maybe Chicago, maybe a team like Utah, maybe a team like, I mean, the pickings are kind of slim.
Yeah.
But Charlotte, maybe they have like a big that they don't mind kind of just randomly throwing in a deal.
They might want to
Or
get rid of like Nick Richards or something like that.
right, yeah. Or Portland has 10,000 centers, so maybe they might do something there as well.
True.
And that's probably, and like I said, that's probably I think what you're ideally looking for if you're in New York, right? Because you have everything else. You're set with guards, you're set with wings, you're set with forwards. That's really the only thing that you're missing, right? Because there's a lot of other teams that have more holes than the Knicks do. But as you said, you can't ignore the fact that your only real viable center is Mitchell Robinson. Now, for the regular season, it may not matter quite as much, because you could probably get away with like random, Precious Achiuwa or random Jericho Sims center minutes. But the postseason is where that might be a little bit more of a problem, because if he's in foul trouble, or if he's hurt, that's rough. But that's also why you got a guy like Bridges. That's why you have OG, so that way those guys on the wings, maybe you're not going to be able to get to the rim. And then if you do, that makes Mitchell Robinson's job easier, because now, if he's got a healthy Randall, he can help out on the boards. OG can help out on the boards because he had to do that while Randall was out. And other things like that. So there's a lot to like about this team, a lot of different lineups and combinations they could do, right? And it feels like a team that is built to try to kind of match Boston because of the wings. And again, who's the Porzingis matchup? I don't know, but again, you can't be perfect. So, but with the Knicks, that's about as good as you can get. Like I said, other than if they can get something at the deadline, smaller move, that would be great. And that's kind of where you want to be, because you don't really want to be in the position of being a team where we have to do a lot at the deadline in order to get to where we want to go. You kind of ideally want to be at, we're already really good, now we just add a couple of minor pieces, and then we can, really make some noise in the playoffs. So like you said, I think that they've shot up where they were the 2 seed last year in the East. But, they may be, kind of the, like you said, runner-up against Boston, right? We'll see what Philly does. We'll see what Milwaukee does, because those are the more popular names, I think. But we'll see. Because with the Knicks, it feels like they may have a little bit more longevity, even though, Embiid and Giannis are better players than Brunson. It just feels like, with the Bucks, you still have questions about the rest of that core because it's older and more injury prone. And then with the Sixers, you have questions about your main guy because he's injury prone. So we'll see. But looking at the ESPN bets, again, we don't do betting stuff, but we just talk about the over-unders. They have the Knicks at 53.5. So, they have them as, being a very good regular season team, because you have the Celtics at 58.5. And then, we already talked about the Philly over-under, right? They were at 52.5. So, I mean, that basically means they expect them to be, probably the second seed in the Eastern Conference. And I think there's, that sounds pretty reasonable to me. I guess the main question is, are they going to win more than 53 games, or are they going to win less? Because I feel like If it's under, it might be like 52 or 51 or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
I think this because again, the thing is with the Eastern Conference, the top of the East now is better, but then you also have to factor in the bottom of the East is worse now because now you have the Bulls who are going to be awful. The Nets are going to be awful, right? Maybe a team like the Pistons are better, but they'll still be bad, and then the Wizards are going to be worse. And they were already bad, but you know what I mean, like.
Yeah.
So that's where
After
some of these
Miami,
wins,
it's slim pickings. Like, you know what I
right?
mean?
So exactly, right. So yeah, like whoever's the 9-10 seed is going to be in there just because they're not horrible enough to be at the bottom, not because like, oh, they might be a sleeper 9-10 seed. Like, no, it's not like the West.
Yeah,
It's a
I'm
little
looking
bit
at like
different.
Atlanta and Toronto for that spot. Maybe even like Charlotte or
Exactly.
something if they can
Right.
rehab.
Yeah. And again, the Knicks last year went 50-32. So
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to say that they could win more than 50 games. So I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean the talent
yeah,
level is through the roof. They've really
yeah.
upgraded at the talent position. It's just like
So would you
this
go over or under?
um
Because I
over
feel like this one is tough.
53. Over 53 is a lot. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
that's what I'm saying. That's where it's really tough. Because then you're talking about getting close to 60 wins, and I don't know if they're going to win 60
You
games
know what?
because again, like the top of the East is better, but the bottom of the East is worse, so it kind of evens out. But then you also have to factor in health as well.
I think
Which
they do
again,
it.
you said what?
I think they go over.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna say over, but like a slight over where maybe they get like 54.
I'm
Like
gonna
I
go
feel like
like
this is gonna
55,
be one of those
56.
yeah, 55. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like in terms of like them being an over or under, if they meet it, if they're over, then it's gonna be by like a few wins. If it's under, it's gonna be by a few wins.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't see like a scenario where it's like their over is 53, but then they only win like 42 games. Like if that would be like one of those where it's like a disastrous scenario because some of these teams, right, they're over unders. I mean, nothing would like you could have like a range of like 10 plus games,
Yeah.
right? Whereas like with this team or say like a team like Boston, that range is pretty small because we know that those really good teams they're just so good. They're too good to, have a really low number of wins, right? Like Boston is too good to only win 50 games, right? If they did, that means everybody was hurt. But, we'll see. But I think for them, I think I'm kind of with you where I think, they're another backup center away from like, taking Boston like to the absolute limit.
Yeah, and the only thing that just has me a little bit on edge with this team is Hartenstein because I think he's the equivalent of Denver losing KCP. If you want me to be real, I know New York hasn't necessarily proved a whole bunch in terms of that they're a
Right.
championship team, but
Right.
I think they could have gotten there if you were able to get if you were able to keep Hardenstein and get McCall Bridges, because I feel like that would have potentially put them over the edge on Boston a little bit. But now losing out on Hardenstein is just
Yeah.
a
You
significant
never
blow
want
that
to lose.
I can't overlook that blow. I
Right.
can't.
You never want to lose, good, smart postseason players because
Yeah,
because he clearly showed what he could do, in a role like that, for the Knicks, and like his style of play feels like one where it's like, I don't think it was fluky. Like I think he's just a
no,
legitimately like really good player.
yeah, he's
So
legit. He's legit.
yeah, exactly. Because it's not really predicated on, him averaging, 15 plus points a game on elite 3-point shooting, right?
No,
It's rebounding, it's defense, it's passing, right? Those are things that are, pretty translatable and transferable to other teams and, from season to season, right? Because
yeah,
like, say if like a guy that's like just a 3-point shooter, he could have a year where he shoots 45% from three. He could have a year where he shoots 40%, then he could have a year where he shoots 35,
yeah. Look at
right?
Luke
And if he
Kennard.
dropped down yeah, exactly, like a Luke Kennard, right? And so if he drops down to 35% from three, he immediately becomes, you know, a less desirable player
Hmm.
because then like what separates him from anybody else that's like a league average 3-point shooter.
Yep.
But then if you talk about him shooting close to 50%, okay, well that's a cheat code. But that's the problem is that that's such a high variance stat. But like when you talk about guys that rebound and defend and pass, that's a lot different. And like you said, that's very difficult to replace because that's not what Robinson does. Robinson will give you rebounding and defense and shot blocking, but he doesn't give you as much playmaking. And he doesn't give you, he doesn't have the offensive versatility of Hardenstein. Even though it's not like Hardenstein is a scorer, but he's got more offensive versatility, like I said, as a passer playmaker, and a little bit more skill as an offensive player. Whereas with Robinson, it's like lobs, put back dunks, which on this type of team, since you're bringing in another, guy that, can score points, that's probably fine, right? Because like ultimately in a starting five that has Brunson, Bridges, OG, and Randall, the fifth guy probably should be a guy that you're not really relying on to score a lot. But that could have also been Hartenstein. So,
Yeah.
that's where, like you said, it's a tough loss. But, I think if you could get like a solid backup center, like you still couldn't really replace it, but it may not be quite as harmful. But, they haven't done that, right? So as of now, we're judging them based off of what they have done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, not really any other, news rumors going around. So I mean, in terms of, other things to talk about, there really isn't much, right? Because a lot of the news and rumors that had been discussed before, nothing's really changed, right? Because obviously, we're kind of at the point in the offseason where nothing really happens a whole lot, right? Because, a lot of teams are pretty solidified on what their rosters are going to be. And a lot of those other teams that may make moves, like say like a Portland or something like that, they're not in a situation where they have to do it right now, right? They could do it later. ESPN did mention, over 2.7 billion spent on NBA free agency deals, right? Which is up from last year's 2.1 billion. And we talked about that, right? Where like the cap's gone up with the media deal coming in, guys are going to be getting more money. It does feel like there is kind of a ripple effect where it feels like, we might see more players now enter free agency that are kind of forced into taking a minimum contract, right? Whereas normally they might get like 10, 12 million or something like that. But to be fair, that happens every offseason. But, this offseason, it felt like it was a little bit more significant. But I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and look. But, just what do you think about that? Because this is a free agency where it's like, we said it wasn't really that great of a free agency in terms of the people at the top. But it was still, a lot of money spent, on all these players.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of how the economics of things go. Like the price is going to go up on certain guys, especially when the TV deals get inked and stuff like that, because that's how players really get paid, because that's how the billions of dollars get circulated throughout the league. So it kind of makes sense, considering that also not necessarily like people were buying on a budget, but I think people were kind of the teams were kind of looking at more so quantity, it seemed like, but also there were times where there was a bit of quality over quantity, but it seemed like there was a lot of cap space around, so I think teams were kind of willing to dole out that money, and then now all that's left are the veterans that are just going to get the minimum.
Yeah, and there's probably some teams maybe waiting on what happens with certain guys, like say like the marketing thing, right? Because we have a few days left where August 6th is the first day he can sign that new extension. And then if he doesn't sign it, right, if he signs it after August 6th, we've talked about it, then he can't be traded.
Yep.
Which I feel like both of us are probably like kind of in the realm of, it feels like that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, he's not moving.
Yeah, just because of the fact that we talked about it a while ago, where once you kept hearing the back and forth with like, Warriors don't want to give up Pods, they'd rather give up Kuminga, but then it's like the Jazz want this guy, they don't want that guy. At a certain point, there's too much back and forth where it feels like it's just not going to happen. Because we talked about it the year before with the Buddy Hield Miles Turner thing, where once we kept hearing about it over and over and over again, that just probably means it's not going to happen. Maybe somebody shocks
Dame
us
to Miami.
Yeah, Dame to Miami. Yeah, exactly. Right? Like, at a certain point, it feels like the most likely scenario is that he probably, doesn't get moved, and then probably signs that extension like a day later or something like that. Because he's talked, people have talked about him being pretty happy in Utah, for various reasons. And then also just like again, like that was like the team that gave him, his breakout, stretch of his career, where now all of a sudden, he has been an all-star, right? He's been a team that's been desired by other teams he's a guy that's been desired by other teams as opposed to being a guy that's kind of just like, we'll just deal him to another team. Right now he wants to, now people want him, on their team, right? Because we've talked about it where teams like Golden State and the Spurs and others, And some of those other locations have kind of dried up, like because now it's almost like everybody's basically been saying like it's Golden State. But
No.
we'll see. I do kind of wonder, like, and obviously we'll talk about their off seasons when they get there. Like, say if you're Golden State, what's the pivot? If let's say Markkanen signs the extension on August 7th, and then he can't be traded. What's the pivot if you're Golden State? Is it just kind of like you're just looking at it as a lost season?
Yeah, there's nothing you can do. What?
Or like, you look at it from the perspective of like, yeah, we'll do what we can with the young guys, but like, if you don't get him, I feel like mentally you're going in knowing like we don't have a shot.
Yeah, they can't
Like,
compete. They need a third
right,
guy in there. It's always been 3 or 4 guys on the Warriors, and that's the truth. As great as Steph is, they that system relies on other guys to be there too. So it's not just Steph. Like look at the years, obviously with KD, we already know about those, but even like the years before that, like Klay Thompson was like peak. Draymond was peak as well. So they don't have Clay anymore. I don't think Kuminga's gonna be able to step up in that kind of vein and be that kind of guy. I
no,
think he'll
he could
be
be better, but he would need to be all-star
and he's not there
or
yet.
better.
He's not there yet.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Neither's
And
Moody.
yeah,
Pods, no. Like they have
right,
great role players on that team, but they need that third guy. If you want
right.
me to be, it
Yeah,
really
and
is
that's why
second.
the
If you want me to
marketing
be
deal.
honest, it really is second.
Right. Yeah, and that's where the marketing deal, depending on what you give up, would be really good. Again, I think both you and I are kind of in the mindset like them getting marketing, like it would make them better, but I still wouldn't pick them to come out of the West. Like,
No,
and like you want to be better. Like it's not like you're gonna turn it down because it's like, oh, we're not gonna be good. And like you still do it if you can, especially if you don't have to give up a ton. But not being able to do it at all, I think would be really rough. Maybe you kind of wait on somebody else, or maybe you pivot to someone else. But then it's like, what is it? Like it's not gonna be Ingram because it didn't work with Team USA, and obviously different situation, different roster, but. But there'll be more Warriors talk once we actually get to them. But
yeah,
we're not there yet.
no.
Yeah, well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, thanks to everybody who was in the live stream with us shortly before we recorded this episode, right? Everybody knows who they are, right? We've mentioned their names multiple times, but we'll continue to do so, right? Miami Heat Nation or Miami Heat Zone as well. Keith Wells, Homelander, and everyone else involved, including people who've been in other streams, right? Like Zay Williams. And then I think we also saw James Wiseman fan in there at different points
Yeah,
as well.
Xander Cade
So,
too.
Xander Cade. So a lot to like. We really appreciate everybody helping us out. And we're going up in terms of subscribers. We're continuing to increase. Again, as we've already mentioned, we already reached our goal of 100 subs. So hopefully you guys can help us get to 500. But continue to follow us on our socials as we continue to post things there as well. We appreciate all that, and we'll either see you in the next live stream or the next episode.